Oh my gosh, it's time for another episode of Comics Show and Tell with Nat Gertler. That's me, Nat Gertler, the man with the voice and the face for radio. I research comics, I write about comics, and I also publish a line of comics called About Comics. And really, the research and publishing aren't separate efforts. A lot of my publishing is because I find some interesting old comics and I publish them as a way of researching them. So today I'll be talking about some material that I actually published a book collection of a couple years back. And if you see that as me being promotional, well, I understand, but that's not really my goal here. One thing I love about researching comics is that there's a wide range of comics in style and format. There are comic books, there are graphic novels, and then you get series of comics that show up in the midst of things that aren't comics, like this lush and risque cartoon panel that appeared weekly in newsletters for American soldiers during World War II, which clearly has nothing in common with this minimalist 4-panel daily kids strip from American mainstream daily newspapers. Well, they have nothing in common except for this one key fact. These are both from the same series, just about 12 years apart. Now, how this turned into that? Well, that's the story for today's episode. Our story starts with World War II. Now, if you don't know anything about that war, I can fill you in on the very basics. The Nazis were the bad guys. I don't mean just that the Nazis were the other side, the antagonists. I mean that the Nazis existed to wipe out millions of people and caused much damage in their attempt to spread their empire, even on the way to an utter, complete defeat. Now, here's a cheat sheet that you can use as you go through life. Nazis are always bad guys. During the war, the U.S. military had plenty of cartoonists on hand, but a lot of them were wielding guns rather than pencils. Folks like Jack Kirby and Charles Schulz here were over in Europe, helping take care of the Nazi threat. But there were a lot of soldiers and a lot of news for soldiers, and that meant newsletters or base newspapers. And as long as you're doing that, you might as well have some funnies. So comics are made specifically for these papers. The most famous of these was Mail Call, Milton Caniff's strip for the soldiers, packed full of sexy ladies in order to keep the attention of American fighting men and remind those overseas what was waiting for them when they came back home. This was syndicated to the camp papers by the Camp Newspaper Service. The same service also offered papers The Wolf, a single-panel gag series that took the GI lust for the ladies and turned it into a character. The Wolf was a woman-obsessed soldier who was massively inappropriate in his pursuit of, shall we say, physical romance. Sometimes he was charming enough to woo them over, sometimes he paid the price for his problematic behavior. He was the embodiment of lust, something that many of the young male readers were bound to understand. The Wolf, which was sometimes called Wolfman or G.I. Wolf, was the creation of Sergeant Leonard Sansone, a 20-something cartoonist from Norwood, Massachusetts, who had, prior to the war, been a comic book artist, working on exciting comics, thrilling comics, and startling comics, among other evocative titles. The Wolf proved popular in the military papers, popular enough to breed imitation, so one cartoonist started Miss Wolf, about a predatory female serving in the military and seeking conquest among the military men. That would actually be a pretty cool strip if it were done by a woman cartoonist, I think, with an honest, if exaggerated, version of women's lust. But no, this was just a male perspective on a female character. When you're talking about the popularity of comic strips, you're generally measuring it in how many different newspapers run a given series. A popular comic strip will run in hundreds of newspapers. The absolute top things at its peak, Peanuts was running in over 2,000 papers. Well, because the U.S. had bases and outposts all over the world during the war, the estimate for how many newspapers and newsletters and whatever else you want to call them that the Wolf was running in, 3,000. The Wolf was not given a name in the series. He's also never given any dialogue. The captions are all people talking either to him or about him. This is certainly not unique in comics, particularly in single-panel series. Series like Bootsy, Brother Juniper, even up to current things like Heathcliff, all tell their tales by people's reaction to the lead character. If he got any reaction from the Wolf at all, it was in his facial expression and his wiggling ears. Yes, his ears tended to wiggle when he was aroused or annoyed. War's End, that's about the best thing that can be said about them. In 1945, when victorious American forces were cleaning up what they could and heading home, a book collection of the Wolf was published. It had an introduction by Milton Caniff, and there was even a special, more portable edition for overseas servicemen. The book was even advertised for sale in the newspapers. This helped to set up the next step for the Wolf, when it left the weekly military papers to instead join the Standard Funnies page at home. Starting January 7, 1946, the panel left the camp newspaper syndicate and was instead syndicated to mainstream papers by United Feature Syndicate, the same folks who were giving newspapers Tarzan and Fritzy Ritz, at least until the Fritzy Ritz strip was taken over by a kid character that had been added into it, and it got turned into Nancy. Being in the daily newspaper meant a few key changes to the Wolf. The most obvious one was its frequency, 6 new panels a week instead of 1. But the biggest change was in the Wolf himself. He was now a civilian. And that made sense. The American public had gotten quite a few stories of their brave boys overseas all during the war, and they supported the troops, but now it was time to let go. But even in the civilian garb, the Wolf was still obsessed with ladies, if perhaps, at times, more gentle about it. While most of the panels were about him with a different girl each day, after a couple months, a second continuing character started showing up. The Wolf had a kid brother. In some ways, the kid was different from his sibling. He had a human face, and he got his own line of dialogue at times. In other ways, though, well, he was obsessed with girls and women, and his ears wiggled. Less than 3 months into the strip, Sansone did something unusual for a single-panel strip. He gave it a storyline. It ran for 7 installments. The kid brother tells the Wolf that a new gal named Mary Lee has moved next door. At first, Mary Lee is not interested in the Wolf, and she explains that she likes guys who are better shaved than his hairy old self. But then she drags him to a beauty shop, one apparently run by a mad scientist with a new facial technique he developed. And when the process is done, the Wolf was a wolf no more, at least not literally. Oh, he still had the woman-chasing instincts, but he had a human head, even if he did keep wiggling those ears. With a human wolf and his human kid brother, it was time for another continuing character, Mom. And Mom comes in handy because while he had some lines initially, the kid brother had joined the Wolf as a character that is talked about but does not talk. Someone has to say something in this strip, and at this point, there's still less than 3 months into the daily version of the strip. And so we get more domestic scenes, and with 2 other characters, sometimes there'd be no Wolf at all. For example, this 1947 comic, this is the one piece of original art I own from the series, and there is no Wolf, although you do get a Frank Sinatra reference in there. Cool. In April 1947, about a year after the physical transformation, another big step took place. The character got a name. No longer was he the Wolf, now he was Wally. That became the title of the series, although it took some newspapers a while to transition. The next month, the kid brother was given a name too. Willie. Wally and Willie, what a pair. Even after the name changed to Wally, after the change in his face, after they made him a civilian, well, they still had copies of that book to sell. So they ran ads letting you know that Wally used to be the Wolf, like this 1947 ad shows. On Monday, March 29th, 1948, readers opened their papers to find that, in the area usually used for a single-panel Wally cartoon, there was a 4-panel cartoon titled Willie. Arranged in 2 rows of 2 panels to match the space, this strip had word balloons and a talking protagonist, things that Wally had always lacked. The next day, it's back to being Wally, although now with that title built into the frame. But a couple days later, it's Willie again. And the series would bounce back and forth for a while. On any given day, you might get a multi-panel Willie or a single-panel Wally, but after just a few months, on August 7th, Wally made his final appearance. Not only from getting his own panel, but from appearing in the strip at all. He wasn't even hanging around like Fritzy Ritz. From now on, it's just going to be Willie every day, and the strip started being advertised as that. Now, Willie may be a fairly obscure strip, but it might actually have some historic importance. You see, this wasn't a standard way to run a strip stacked into a square like this, but it seemed to work okay. Papers that wanted to run it in the shape of a normal strip could just cut it in half and place those halves side by side. A couple of years later, the syndicate that ran Willie, Wally, and the Wolf, whatever you wanted to call this series, got a new strip, and the cartoonist had sent the initial samples of it as a 3-panel-a-day strip. And the syndicate asked if the strips could be redone as 4 panels of equal size. Now, as long as all the panels were the same size, no matter how many of them, the newspaper could run them stacked vertically in the space of a column of a newspaper text. But with 4 panels, they could run them much in the arrangement that Willie had, and could replace a single-panel cartoon on the funnies page without a change of the layout. The title could even be built right into the strip like it was for Willie, rather than needing space outside, as was the usual way with strips. And the title that got put into this new strip, the short title that would fit easily in the small space? Peanuts. Yeah, you know the strip we're talking about. Willie seems not to have been too much of a success as a series, but it did manage to get one bit of merchandise out there: this coloring book. As the 1950s moved on, the strip evolved. It gained a simpler drawing style, and starting in 1954, it stopped being so much about Willie and his mom and more about Willie and a quirky bunch of neighborhood kids. This is Maggie and Barbell here. There's also Puddin' and Sob and Sam, and a dog named Happy. Why the change? Well, I can't say for sure, but there's an explanation that seems obvious to me. Peanuts, with its simple drawing style and quirky neighborhood kids, was quickly becoming popular for the syndicate. And maybe making Willie more like that would help the strip. But if that's the reason, it didn't prove successful. Willie ended his run in newspapers in 1956. Creator Leonard Sansone died in an automobile accident in 1963 at the age of 47. Oh, by the way, the joke of this gag has to do with someone making the unbelievable claim that their television has a 72-inch screen. Welcome to the past, folks. A couple years back, I got a copy of the old collection of the military strips and thought it was of particular interest, so I wanted to reprint it. I reached out to Sansone's daughter, actually, still around, and got permission to reprint it. So I came out with this edition, which has not only all the strips that were in here from the military days, but the first couple months of the civilian daily strip, up to the point where he gets a human face. I figured that was a good cutoff point. Oh, if you're wondering why I flipped the image backwards like that, it's because in the original, you see, that's not the complete image. The leg he's chasing after turns out to be a mannequin leg being held by someone. And we don't have a dust jacket on the paperback, so instead I continued it onto the back cover. Anyway, if you want one of these, they're available through Amazon worldwide. I'll put a link in the video notes so that you can know where to go to get it. So that, my friends, is how a lush weekly single-panel strip about a horny soldier with a wolf's head got turned into a daily multi-panel strip about neighborhood kids and their dog through the magic of comics. Now, apparently, at the end of the last video, I forgot to tell people to please click like, and guess what? A lot fewer people clicked like than usual, and I felt kind of bad. So please click like, and if you haven't already, click subscribe, and until next time, go read some comics.